AWS, and S3 is one of the pillars of AWS. As I said, AWS actually Amazon built S3 for their own internal use, and then when the cloud-based storage became popular, and that's when Amazon made S3 as one of their services. And S3 is very, very popular, and S3 has been growing ever since. And even today, if you see, there are petabytes of data that is being stored in S3 by multiple millions of customers across the globe. Okay. So S3 is not only popular for data storage, S3 is popular for the developer community as well, where developers use S3 to store their objects in S3, like static files, like images, right, like log files, right, and then they use the APIs, the S3 APIs, to refer to those files through their programs, right, and it makes the programming quite simple, and it makes their life very simple, since S3 is a fully managed service, and developers don't have to worry about storing a backup of the data and storing and managing the life cycle of the data and things like that. So S3 comes with a lot of features that ensures that the data life cycle is taken care. Not only developers, even analytics developers, who are actually building analytics applications, data lakes, data warehouses, AI, ML, right? Data scientists, they also use S3 quite extensively. There are actually a bunch of use cases around using S3 for analytical workloads, where developers use S3 for storing their data and running ETL jobs on top of it, and then generating reports out of S3 data, right? And also, with S3, you also will be able to use S3. I mean, not only through APIs, but also you can use query S3, like how you query SQL data, database RDBM as SQL using the structured query language. There's a service called Athena that does it. Okay, so now what we also did yesterday was we looked at um, hosting a static website in S3. So S3 can also act as your web server, hosting your static web content. And in fact, that's one of the architectural choices for developers, who want to actually host their static website on S3, all the static content on S3, like your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, right? All of these are actually stored in S3. And the dynamic content is actually, will come from your backend database using some sort of a microservice architecture or Lambda functions or API gateway and things like that. So that way, you don't need a web server to be running on an EC2 server. In fact, we all looked at building a web server based out of EC2, where we built a Linux server. On Linux server, we deployed a Apache web server. We hosted a simple Hello RPL Champs web page. But the same Hello RPL Champs web page, we also hosted in S3, and S3 was able to serve that content using a HTTP URL, right? So that's the difference. So in the earlier case, we had to build everything from scratch on a EC2 instance. We have to manage the operating system. We had to manage the security groups. We had to manage the NACLs. We had to manage the installation of the software, right? And we had to basically log into the EC2 instance, start the service, right? And do all the other things. Whereas in S3, I showed you yesterday, it was pretty simple, where you just had to create a new bucket, upload all your files, HTML files into that, right? And change the bucket properties to make it as a static website, right? And then give a index.html or the name of the main index page, index.html, which will be the main page, right? And then you had to basically remove the block public access settings and make all the objects public, and then hit the URL that is given, and then you're able to actually access and browse a complete website in about less than 5 minutes, correct? So that's the power of S3. That's the power of static website hosting on S3. So today what we are going to do is we're going to see about CloudFront. Okay. Okay. All right. Before I actually get into CloudFront, there's something, the important concept that I want to explain to all of you. Okay, so we hosted a static website, hello RPL champs in S3. So later on, what I did was I actually um, created, pointed it to um, my website, right? I mean, I have a domain, right? I have a domain all within space.com. I basically pointed it to my own domain. And then this is the web bucket, which is actually pointing, which is actually present in my account, right? I mean, this is the website which is running some template that I just downloaded from the internet, and I just, for the sake of demo, right? And then you have index.html, pages, layout, images, and so on and so forth. I mean, layout has got your CSS objects, scripts, JavaScripts, correct? It has got JavaScripts, it has got some HTML, it has got some CSS, it has got some so many other content and assets which are there, right? Styles which are there, right? CSS, PC framework.css, layer.css, right? So now what's happening is when I actually go to my S3 bucket, when I say hit on properties, right, if I just go below, I'm getting this URL, right? I can also access my website through this by hitting this URL. It will directly take me through to my website. But this has got some complicated stuff here, right? Which is difficult to remember, right? Rather, I don't want this URL to be exposed to my world, right? I want my domain URL to be exposed to my world, right? What is my domain world? That is like whatever, mydomain.com or whatever it is, right? In my case, I have a all within space.com, example.com, whatever it is, right? So I want that, or my company, right? I mean, I'm starting a company and I want my company's website to actually point to my S3 bucket for the static website of my organization. I can simply replace this URL, or rather point my domain CNAME record to point to this one. Okay, that's what I did yesterday, where I logged into my Route 53. I'm using Route 53 as my name server. Okay, and within the name server, I logged in. I created a CNAME which pointed triple S RPL dot all within space. Right, I pointed this to this. Okay, so that's what happened. So triple S RPL dot all within space dot pointing is pointing to this particular URL. Okay. Okay. All right. So now let's come back. So now I have got a bucket and which is basically hosting this thing. So now I want to basically take my website global. Okay. Right now the bucket is hosted where? Bucket is hosted in the Mumbai region, right? So basically all my data is present in the Mumbai region, right? I mean, in Mumbai region, there's one S3 bucket which is hosting my static website, HTML, CSS, and all of that. So now I want to make it global, and I want to ensure that I serve this content globally across, right? And I mean, for example, if we're all in Hyderabad, right? And we are trying to access the website. I mean, it accesses quite fast, right? If you see, this is the website. I mean, let me just refresh this. Okay, it accesses it quite fast, right? But let's also do some quick. If you open developer tools in your browser, right, you have to hit function F12, right? F12 is the developer tools. There you will see this network. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how long is the page taking to load. Okay, so if you see, the page has taken about 44 milliseconds to load. Okay, if you see on the right side, you will see that the page has taken about 44 milliseconds to load. Okay, so now I'm going to basically load the same page from server which is there in US. Okay, this server is actually in US East. Okay, this is a server which is lying in US East. I'm actually trying to load the same page from a server which is in US East one. Let me just bring up the browser. Okay, I've just brought up the browser and I'll just load the developer tools there as well. I'll go to the network tab. Okay, and then I'll just hit that URL. Okay, this is our static website URL, right? I'm just hitting that URL. Let me just say hit enter. Yeah, look at it. It took about 1.2 seconds. Okay, so if you see the overall load time is about 2.3 seconds, right? So it made 16 requests and it took about 2.3 seconds to load the page. Whereas in our case, locally, when we loaded, it took about 489 milliseconds. Okay, since the website is actually running in Mumbai, which is in India, right? It does not have to cross too many hops, right? And we are all sitting in Hyderabad and we are trying to load the website. It loaded this in about 489 milliseconds because it didn't have to go all the way across continents and then fetch the data. Okay. Whereas if I do the same thing from a server which is in the US, it took about almost 4 times, or not 4 times, yeah, 5 times slower than when I'm trying to load it from India. Okay, you can just consistently see that. I'll just clear this. Sometimes, your browser also caches the content. Okay, sometimes your browser also caches the content. So yeah, if you see, if it took 467 milliseconds. Whereas if I go to US, and I just delete this whole thing, again, I'll load it. Yeah, at least it took double now because that was the first request, where the first request, it took about 2.5 seconds because it downloaded all the content once, right? Because your browser also keeps a cache of your JavaScript, CSS, right? And things like that, right? So those are not again loaded because they are all taken from your browser cache, and also images. Your browser stores all the cache locally, right? But if you clear all the cache, let me just go clear all the cache and then load it the first time. I'll just go clear the data. I'll just clear all. There's about 55 MB of data which is there. I'm just clearing everything. Okay, I've just cleared all the cache. Let me just go back here. It took about 854 milliseconds, right? Now I cleared all the cache. Let me again load it. Yeah, see, it again took like 2.4 seconds. Okay, whereas in my local, let me also clear the cache in my local. Okay, rather I will use an incognito window so that it does not take the cache. Yeah, see, it took about 692 milliseconds. Okay, so now you see the difference, right? I mean, you see the difference between accessing the same website, user accessing the same website from the same region, right, or the nearby region, versus accessing the same website from a region which is far, right? So now that's where, if you see, primarily the experience, the user experience is really impacted, because you want to create a web application. You want your application or your website has to be reachable from all the places with the same amount of latency, right? You do not want the latency of your website to change, based on the geographical locations of the users, right? You want, like Facebook, when you load Facebook both from US or both from India or Singapore, the Facebook also loads pretty much similar, right? I mean, it does not change the latency or the or the user experience of Facebook does not change, right? Similarly, you take Amazon.com or Amazon.in, right? You take Amazon.in itself, right? Amazon.in does not change, right? I mean, a person accessing the Amazon.in from India, from US, or from Singapore, they all see the same latency, right? I mean, it doesn't really change much. Yeah, see, look at the fast, how quick it loaded. I'm just trying to access Amazon.in from. Okay, let me just clear the cache. Clear the data. Clear. Yeah, I've just cleared it. Okay, let me go back. Delete this and let me refresh this. Yeah, so see, it loaded the entire site in about 1 second. Okay, but it's still loading. It's doing a lazy loading, which is fine, but it's just the DOM content. It just loaded in about a second. And you can also see that, right? I mean, you can also forget about this. You can also see this. Just refresh it. You will see that within a second, it flashes and it brings the entire website. Same way, if I'm trying to load Amazon.in, even from my local India, see how fast it comes up. It does not change, right? I mean, the Amazon.in could be hosted probably in the US. It's not hosted in India. Probably it's hosted in the US, but still, if you see, it does not change, correct? So now what is the technology that goes behind that, right? I mean, in this case, let me go back to the world map. See, there are two types of things, right? So when you're serving your website, whatever is serving the website, right? Whatever is serving the web application, whatever server or service which is serving the web application is called the origin servers. So you have to understand that very clearly. Okay, I've got two types of servers. One is the origin server. Okay, this yellow box that I put is the origin server. That's the legend. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my origin server is actually present in India, in Mumbai region. Okay, that's where my origin server is present. Okay, so now I have a user. I'm going to represent the user as a circle. Okay, this is the user. Oops. Okay, so this is my user, right? My user is somewhere in, let's assume, okay, the origin server is in Mumbai. I'm just going to reduce it a little bit so that I get some real estate. Origin server is in Mumbai. User is in Hyderabad. Okay, user is in Hyderabad. Okay, so now what happens is when the origin server is in Mumbai and the user is in Hyderabad, the user is closer to the origin server, right? So that way, what you're seeing is you're seeing about 400, 500 milliseconds of latency between the user and the server which is serving the content from Mumbai region, because I've hosted my S3 website in the Mumbai region, right? So now let's slightly take it. I've got the user in. Let me take the user to say Middle East. I'm taking the user to say Dubai. Now the distance is slightly longer. This distance is probably doubled, or it has become 3 times or 2.5 times. So you will see that the number of hops would also increase. The distance increases, correct? Because the distance is longer and the data has to be transmitted over um, over the connection from Dubai to from Mumbai to Dubai, right? Let's further increase it. Let's take it to Europe. Okay, taking it to somewhere in the northern Europe. the distance is further increased, right? Let's take it to South America, Brazil or somewhere. Distance is further increased. Let's take it to US. Okay, I'm just taking it to Seattle, farthest. Okay, I'm just taking it to Washington, Seattle, which is the farthest. Okay, and also I'm just putting it in. I'm taking it to somewhere in Chicago or somewhere, right? Midwest, somewhere in Chicago. And then one more in, because US is a big country, right? So I'm just taking it to somewhere like Florida. Okay, so these are the 3 locations that I have in the US. My users are spread across these locations, and somewhere in Europe, somewhere in say South America, Middle East, and probably this side to the on the Far East. They are in the probably in Auckland, okay, New Zealand. I'm just taking it to New Zealand. Okay, so now this is how my users are spread across the entire globe, right? So now all these users are actually trying to come. If you see users coming from say New Zealand and Seattle, right? So they will have the maximum latency, because I just showed you, right? I mean, in fact, in this case, the machine that I had, it's basically in US East 1, which is North Virginia. It's somewhere here. It's somewhere here, North Virginia. Okay, if the user is actually trying to hit from there, it has to actually come like this, right? So there has to come like this. User has to come like this all the way. Okay, and then from India, the user has to come. User has to go only traverse this much if it is India. Okay, so now that's the disadvantage that we have by having an origin server in one location, and you're wanting to serve the content globally across the world, because cloud is all about, AWS is all about go global in minutes, which is true, right? I mean, yesterday we did that, right? I mean, yesterday we hosted a static website in about less than 5 minutes. Okay, and then you gave the URL, and anybody in the internet could actually access it. So all that they need is an internet connection and time for the DNS propagation, and then you are able to access your website, correct? But how about the user experience? You can go global in minutes very quickly without any problem. But how about user experience, right? I can't tell my users sitting in the US or sitting in Auckland or sitting in South America or Europe to say that, guys, you will face some issues. You will have some, you will have some, latency issues. Please don't mind. I mean, those latency issues will be there. You have to live with it. You can't say that, right? That's going to basically bring down your reputation. It's going to lead to, a poor user experience. It will lead to frustration with the users. And in fact, that's the whole purpose of having a good user experience, right? You want to basically avoid frustration with the users, right? Imagine you logging into maybe a reservation site and waiting for 10 minutes for the main page to load. After you hit the login button, again it takes another 5-10 minutes. Then you will basically lose the whole charm, right? Rather you stand in the queue and then you get tickets, right? So that's the kind of user experience that people would actually expect, right? But now it has changed, okay, with the help of content delivery network, with the help of caching, with the help of other technologies. That whole thing has changed. Now things have become much better, and things are quite faster and quite responsive, right? That's where CDN plays a major role, right? What is CDN? CDN means content delivery network. Okay, I'm just going here. I'll just close all of this. Just go back. Yeah. What is CDN? CDN is called Content Delivery Network. Okay. So now if you see, uh, I'd given you this URL sometime back and I'd walked you through this, right? Where infrastructure.aws, right? Infrastructure.aws gives you the global infrastructure, all the regions, all the edge locations, how the connections are going from one location to other location and things like that, right? So if you see North Virginia, it actually gets connected to Europe, right? And all that lines that you see are all the backbone of AWS. Okay, the network backbone of AWS, right? Okay, so now let's take Mumbai. Okay, let's take Mumbai. And in Mumbai, you've got availability zones. Okay, this is my Mumbai. I've got one region, okay, which is Mumbai region, right? And one more region is coming up in Hyderabad shortly. Okay, and in Mumbai region, we have got three availability zones. The blue ones are availability zones. The region is called out here, orange box. Plus, apart from that, we also have something called points of presence. Okay, the points of presence are nothing but in India, you have got one, two, three, four, five, six points of presence. Okay, what are points of presence? Points of presence is nothing but they are edge locations, right? Just go back to Mumbai. Okay, what is points of presence? Points of presence, AWS has the largest global infrastructure footprint of any cloud provider in order to deliver customers content through a worldwide network of points of presence locations, which consists of edge locations. Edge. What is edge? Edge means edge. I mean, it's basically at the edge of things, right? I mean, you don't have to go deep inside and fetch the data, right? It's all present within the edge. You just grab it from the edge and take it. Okay, it's like this, right? So where um, you have, just give me an example. I'm just giving and thinking of a right example. Okay, there is a restaurant. Okay, there's a restaurant on the highway. Okay, and the restaurant is so popular, right? I mean, it serves delicious dishes, and there's so many people, who stop by, have their lunch or dinner or breakfast in that restaurant. I mean, the restaurant has become so popular that it is not able to accommodate seats for tables for everybody who comes in, right? So the restaurant actually looks at a strategy where, okay, so many vehicles come, uh, and so many buses come stop by, right? And they can't expand the capacity any further, right? So now what they think is, okay, so now why don't we just do a takeaway, functionality within the restaurant? What they do is they ensure that they are able to prepare food, the same delicious food, and they're able to set up counters just outside the restaurant, okay, on the street, on the by lane, and they have got a truck, which quickly gives the packet, to whoever is stopping by in about less than a minute or so, and then they just grab it and go, right? So that way, that's called a edge, right? You don't have to go inside to collect something and come outside, right? Rather, it is there on the edge. You're able to just collect the food and go, right? So that way, these are all edge locations. So now these edge locations are called points of presence. Now, what this edge location gives us, they also have servers, right? The edge locations has got compute storage. All these edge locations, cache the content. Okay, what is caching? CACHIE. Cache is a way to temporarily store the data in memory. Okay, that's the most important aspect, right? I mean, you have a cache even in your computer, right? What is your cache in your computer? Your RAM is cache, okay, which has a chip, right, which can basically read and write data quickly, right? Your CPU can quickly retrieve the data from your memory, unlike your disk, right? For disk, since the operation is longer, every time you can't go back to disk, right? You have to what your RAM does is it caches some data within itself. So if it is present, it basically takes it from the RAM itself and then it uses it for its computational purposes. Similarly, your CPU also has got some minimal cache present within it for even more faster storage, right? So cache is basically a kind of a compute infrastructure that enables you to store data in memory, and then which will allow you to retrieve the data in a much more faster pace. Okay, just sorry, just give me a second. Okay, all right, so that's called a cache, right? And now what these point of presence consists is, they consist of edge locations and regional edge cache servers. They're all regional in nature. So Amazon CloudFront is a fast content delivery network service that securely delivers data, videos, applications, and APIs to customers globally with very low latency, high transfer speeds, all within a developer-friendly environment. Okay, so that's what, all these cache related services are actually deployed in the cache locations. And see, you can't choose to deploy them. It is managed internally by AWS, right? So when you actually choose one of these services like CloudFront or Accelerator, Global Accelerator, I mean, these services actually use the cache which is present in the edge locations, right? In India itself, if you see, there are about 6 edge locations, right? Similarly, in Singapore, there are 2 edge locations. So now in India, people who are coming, say, accessing from, say, Hyderabad or Chennai, they will most likely try to get the data from here. Okay, because that is closer, right? So that's how the algorithm works, right? It goes to the closest and then it fetches the data from there, right? Maybe people in Delhi and in North India will actually go to the edge location, which is out here. Probably it's somewhere in Delhi. Okay, and then people in East India would actually take the servers from take the data from here, right? They don't have to even go to Mumbai. That is how it works. Okay, so now let's go around the globe once. So now if you see, there are so many cache points of presence like that across. Like in Middle East, there are 3 locations. Europe has so many edge locations, right? Europe has got so many uh, regions as well, but apart from that, there are also so many edge locations. Europe has got about 6 7 regions. Okay, Ireland, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Milan, Spain, and Stockholm. But if you see, there are so many edge locations in the Europe, okay, which is acting as a cache to store the data and give the data which is closer to the user, right? If the user is somewhere, say in the northern Europe, somewhere here, they'll actually go here. They don't have to go all the way to London or Paris or Frankfurt or even to India, right? This will actually store the cache, and this will be able to distribute that cache content locally within the user's reach. Okay, let's go to the US. Okay, US has got again 7 regions in the US, right? Let's discount the Gulf Cloud, but if you just discount the Gulf Cloud, you have Northern California, Oregon, Ohio, and North Virginia, right? So North Virginia is the first region that came up ever. That's one of the most happening regions in the world. And Canada, there's one region, and you see there are so many cache locations in the US, so which will serve content to the users close by. And US is a big country, right? I mean, um, in terms of the area, right? So now, obviously, there are users across US, who like if you host your website in say Oregon or North California, which is US East to US West to, and if a user is sitting in say North Virginia or somewhere in New York, I mean the latency will be much higher, right? Because it has to cross the entire country and go to the other. From East Coast, it has to go to West Coast, right? So which will be quite a bit of a latency with respect to user experience. So that's why, if you enable cache, it'll just go close by and it'll just pick up the data from the closest point of presence that it is able to find the data from. Okay, so now let's just go back here. So now this is where, if you see, okay, so now this is where, if you see, you've got your caches, right? And let me just put a cache. Now, cache is nothing but all your points of presence, right? There are so many points of presence in the world. I'm not going to just put everything. Let me just put a few. I'll just take this. Okay, I'm just going to put a few points of presence here and there. Yeah, let me just take it to here, right? So now these green boxes are all cache locations or edge locations, right? So now when you enable CloudFront for your website, what CloudFront does is it takes the content from your origin server, which is basically your orange box. It takes the content from here, and then it caches that content globally across all its edge locations. Okay, it will basically take it, it will distribute that content across the globe. So that way, when the user is actually trying to access your website, say from Seattle, he doesn't have to come all the way to Mumbai. Okay, of course, he has to come to Mumbai for all dynamic data, but all the static data, all the data that can be cached, that can be stored in edge locations, which are like static HTML pages, because that itself is a huge one, right? I mean, if you see the actual data, the dynamic data, there's no other choice. The users have to hit the origin server because the origin server has the latest copy of your data. Like, let's take for example, like the user would want to say if it's a banking application, user would want to get the latest statement or the current statement. Obviously it is not a stale data, right? It's a dynamic data because the statement might change anytime. You might make credit card transactions or any transactions anytime, so you can't show a 2 days old data to the user, right? So that's all dynamic data. So for that, anyways, the API call has to come all the way to the Mumbai region. But the other content which you have, because it's not just about the data, right? When you open a website, bank's website, you have so many other things. You have like images, you have some nice colorful promotions going on, right? And you have got some CSS, you have got some JavaScript, and so many other content which is there. All of those can be cached. If you prefer to go with that, I mean, those content will all be cached in the global network, right? And then it will be served closer to the user. It will be served from a point of presence or a edge location which is closer to the user. That is what CloudFront does. Okay, so now let's go to CloudFront documentation. Let's quickly review that and let's go and create a CloudFront distribution. Okay, just going to CloudFront. What is CloudFront? Amazon CloudFront is a web service that speeds up distribution of your static and dynamic web content such as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and image files to your users. CloudFront delivers your content through a worldwide network of data centers called edge locations. When a user requests content that you are serving with CloudFront, the user is routed to the edge location that provides the lowest latency, which is time delay, right? What is latency? Which is time delay. For example, if I have to connect from my laptop to a server which is in Mumbai region, I mean the round trip, the time it takes to go talk to the server and come back, that is called latency. Okay, provides the lowest latency so that content is delivered with the best possible performance. Okay, if the content is already in the edge location with the lowest latency, CloudFront delivers it immediately. If the content is not in the edge location, CloudFront retrieves it from the origin that you have defined, such as S3 bucket, a media package channel, or a HTTP server that you have identified as the source for the definitive version of your content. So now, for example, when you create a CloudFront distribution, it's called a distribution. What Amazon AWS does is it gets the static content from your origin server. What is your origin server? Always remember these terms, right? Your origin server is the server which is actually serving the content, the orange one. So in this case, you have got these edge locations. So what CloudFront does is it takes the static content from your origin server and then it stores it in all these locations. That's why it takes a bit of a time to propagate the data across all the edge locations. Okay. So now, if the data is, so when the user is actually trying to access it, the user would go and then go to the cache location, right? And then it would actually check whether the data is present there or not, be it an image or a document or whatever it is, right? I mean, it could be a static content, whether the image is present or not. If it is present, it serves it immediately. If it is not present, it goes to the origin server, fetches the data, it puts it in the cache, it stores it in the cache, and then it serves the content to the user for the first time. Next time the user goes, it does not have to go to the origin server. It has the content in the cache, and then it stores it within the cache, right? And you may ask, what happens if the image changes here? What happens if the source changes? Okay, there's something called cache invalidation that happens, right? If a content changes here, CloudFront automatically updates that revised content in the CDN in its edge location. It will not serve the stale content. It will immediately change the content. So that's called cache invalidation. So cache invalidation, or you can also do the cache invalidation whenever you are uploading new content, whenever you're changing your website, you can go to CloudFront and you can say invalidate the old cache. So what it does is it deletes the version of the data, cached data across the globe, and then it replenishes with the new content that you have uploaded in your website. Okay. Now imagine, I mean, YouTube videos, right? How YouTube videos are playing with so less latency, right? Because if you see YouTube videos, they're all, I mean, they're probably stored in somewhere in US, right? Or content which is as per the country. If you go to youtube.com, right? Of course, I'm reading it from I'm loading YouTube from my live from my country, right? So obviously YouTube must have some servers within India to serve India-based content, right? But if I actually go to YouTube in the US, I'll just go to YouTube in the US and load some. This is in the US, right? So I'm just going to YouTube in the US. The server is in the US. So if I go to YouTube in the US, I'll just pick up probably I'll just pick up this video, which is like NBC nightly, right? I'll just pick up this video. I'll just copy this URL. I'll come back to India, and then I'll just say Control V. Yeah. See, it's able to actually, yeah. See, I don't see any latency, correct? Why? What is the reason? It uses CDN behind the scenes, right? Whenever a video is uploaded in the US, because this is a US NBC nightly news, right? I mean, this is last night's nightly news, November 10th nightly news, right? So now this is present in the US. Okay? This video must have been uploaded in one of the YouTube origin servers in the US. So immediately what happens is the moment it gets uploaded in the origin server in the US, this video gets cached in all the edge locations across the world of YouTube's edge servers. Okay. And then when I, as a user, I'm sitting in Hyderabad, I'm trying to access the same video. It's actually loading the video not from the US origin server. It is actually loading it from the cache of that video, which is present in my India YouTube servers, India YouTube edge servers. Okay, that's how it works. Otherwise, what would happen is when I play the video, I should be able to. It'll take some time, right? It'll take latency. The latency will be higher where it has to stream the content, the entire content from US to India, which will take a longer route. The latency will be much higher. Okay, so now that's the power of CDN, and that's how CDN works, and that's how you have to use CDN when you want to go global, right? And when you want to give the same user experience to your users globally, you have to go for CDN, right? Let's see one example here. As an example, suppose that you're serving an image from a traditional web server, not from CloudFront. For example, you might serve an image sunsetphoto.png using the URL http://example.com/sunsetphoto.png. Your users can easily navigate to this URL, see this image, but they probably don't know that their request was routed from one network to another through the complex collection of interconnected networks that comprise the internet until the image was found. So CloudFront speeds up the distribution of your content by routing each user request through the AWS backbone network to the edge location that can best serve your content. Typically, this is a CloudFront edge server that provides the fastest delivery to the viewer. Using the AWS network dramatically reduces the number of networks that your users' request must pass through, which improves performance. Users get lower latency, the time it takes to load the first byte of the file, and higher data transfer rates. You also get increased reliability and availability because copies of your files known as your objects are now held or cached in multiple edge locations. Similar to that YouTube video, it's available now probably across maybe 100 odd edge locations across the globe. That YouTube has a copy of that video across the globe. Okay, so now that's how the caching works. That's called CDN. CDN is a very important topic. It is used very extensively for web applications, for websites, right? So for APIs, right? So now you want to have a API, you want to build an API and expose that API and make money out of it, right? And you have to ensure that you would have promised an SLA. Every API request would complete in 100 milliseconds, less than 100 milliseconds, right? Or 50 milliseconds. So now a user who's sitting in US trying to invoke your API might get 800 milliseconds, so then they won't pay you because they'll say that you promised 100 milliseconds, I'm only getting 800 milliseconds. So now that's where you have to use CDN, right? You have to basically cache your frequently used content which are static in nature, right? And you can basically go ahead and whichever is not dynamic in nature, you can just go ahead and use CDN to cache your data. Now let's go to the console. Let's get back to the same website that we have, right? rpl.allwithinspace.com, right? So now I just showed you that it took how long to load. Let me go to network. It took about 328 milliseconds. Let me go back to my other server, right? I'm just going to say rpl.allwithinspace.com. That's my domain. Okay, I don't want to use the S3's URL. I'll use my domain itself. Just yeah, so it took about 2 seconds. It took about 2.39 seconds. Okay, whereas it took about 328 milliseconds. Okay, so now let's see how do we make this similar. Okay, how do we make this load time similar to each other? For that, what you need to do is I'll move out of my S3 console. I'll open something called CloudFront, which is the global content delivery network. I'll just open the CloudFront in a new tab. Okay, CloudFront, it's called a distribution. Okay, you need to create a distribution. So where you say that create a distribution, and then you have multiple types of distributions, web distribution or RTMP distribution. So this is basically for live streaming and things like that for media, right? So for example, like how YouTube is streaming their data, how Amazon Prime videos, how do they stream media, sorry, videos. It's all using the RTMP protocol, right? So using this, you'll be able to basically, you create, and then in fact, CloudFront is distributing the support for RTMP distributions on December 31st. Just read this. Okay, so now let me get, it's a web distribution is what I need. So because now web distribution itself supports live streaming, and now what Amazon AWS has done is they have brought all the features of say websites, media, right, videos, audios, and everything in one single web distribution. That's why this is going to be sunset in a month's time. So let's just go. You will not see that RTMP even post in December. Okay, I'm just going create a distribution. Okay, here you have to basically give a origin domain name. Okay, so in this case, I want to have my website. Okay, I want to have my S3 website to be the domain name for that. So what for that? In fact, you can put your distribution. It can point to S3 bucket. It can point to load balancers, right? It can also point to any other websites also. Like for example, I've got my website, which is not hosted on Amazon. Rather, it's running in my on-premises or it's running in Google, right? I can also put that domain name, that path out here, right? So that it tries to go get that data and then it caches within the CloudFront distribution, right? So in this case, and what I have to do is I have to go here and take the URL. I'll just put the URL here. Okay, this is the URL that I want my website to, my CloudFront to cache. Okay, just done this. and you can just give a origin ID to this. I'll just say origin ID is, it's a unique ID. You can just leave it as it is. And then there are other settings that which are there, like origin connection items. You can just see what each one of those mean, right? Number of times that CloudFront attempts to connect to the origin, after which it times out. Because if your origin is down, and if you delete your website, obviously your CloudFront also won't be able to connect to the origin and download the data from there, right? So that's basically the timeout settings. The amount of time in seconds, which is basically the connection timeout, 10 seconds. And you can inject custom headers to your website, right, through this CloudFront distribution, right? You want to basically inject some custom headers, HTTP headers. How many of you know what an HTTP header is, right? If you actually read the HTTP protocol, and you will see that HTTP, like similar to what TCP headers are, HTTP also has got some headers which can be used by developers to validate certain things, to authenticate users, to allow or deny requests and things like that. So that's called HTTP headers. You can just pump custom headers through that, and you can say that whether it will use HTTP or HTTPS, right? You can say that if you want it to be secure, you use HTTPS, or you can redirect HTTP to HTTPS. If any request that comes as HTTP, it redirects to HTTPS, or it can just be HTTP and HTTPS both. And what are the methods that are allowed? All these methods are HTTP methods such as get, put, post, head options, and so on and so forth. So I'll just keep only get and head because I'm not doing much. So then what you can do is you have some settings around field level encryption config. You can encrypt certain fields so that you have a very secure website, and your information security policies might say that certain critical fields will have to be encrypted from your HTTP perspective. Then you have your cache and origin request settings. You can go for your own policies from a caching policy, right? And I mean, of course, you'll have to, these are advanced settings. Many a times, your default settings would actually be enough. But in certain cases where your information security wants the cache to be behaving differently, and they want to basically override the TTL. What is TTL? TTL is called time to live. Okay, time to live is every object in the cache will have a time to live, right? If you have a 30 minutes as the time to live for an object, okay, so now what happens is when the object gets cached in the cache from the origin server, after 30 minutes, the object will expire. Object will get deleted. Again, the cache will try to go to the origin server, get a new copy of the object and put it in the cache. So that's called time to live. It's very important setting, right? If you want your time to live to be overridden, you can just go ahead and create a new cache policy. Okay, there's something called origin request policy. What the origin request policy does is it specifies the headers, query strings, and cookies that CloudFront includes with the request that it sends to the origin, right? You want to add additional headers and you want to modify the behavior of your query strings and things like that. Yeah, A49, can you please go on mute?
Sorry, I muted.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's called the origin request policy. So then you also have, other things to like, stream the media quite smoothly and things like that, right? I mean, this is for, if you want to stream a live event, you can actually enable this smooth streaming, so where it ensures that it caches the object, and then it's able to effectively perform the smooth streaming, right? And also there's something called restrict viewer access, where you can use signed URLs or signed cookies and things like that. And if you want to compress objects automatically, you can also do that. You can just override the no of 2s, where it automatically compresses the objects. And there's so many other settings that are available, right? And you can use the distribution settings as price class. There are different price class where you feel that your users are only in the US, Canada, and the Europe, right? And you don't want to give you don't want to cache your content outside of these three continents. Okay, US, Canada, and Europe. You can only choose to cache in this region. You don't have to go to the Asia Pacific, China, Japan, and Australia, and all the other, or Africa. Okay, so now that's where you can only choose this region to be cached. Similarly, you want to have US, Canada, Europe, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. You can just do that, or you can just go with all the edge locations, right? If you choose all the edge locations that AWS has got will get the content at the same time. Okay. Yeah, and then you can use a WAF. WAF is a web application firewall. I'll talk about it later. And then you can also have your own custom domain names out here. All right, so where you say that, I mean, you want to use your custom domain name, you can just do that. And then you can SSL certificate, right? I mean, you can, by default, every content that goes through CloudFront has an SSL certificate attached to it. Okay, what is SSL certificate? SSL certificate is like this. You see the lock symbol. There is a lock symbol with which you get the SSL certificate. This is the certificate which encrypts and decrypts the data, which encrypts the data before sending it to the web server. So you use the default certificate, and then you also can override some of the supported HTTP versions. You want to use HTTP 2, 1.1 and 1.0, or you just want to use the older ones of 1.1 and 1.0. And default root object, I have the default root object as index.html, right? That is my default root object. I'll just give index.html out here. Yeah, and then the distribution state is enabled. Okay, I'll just leave all the other settings as it is. Right, I mean, there's so many settings. You can just modify those settings and see how it works, and there's enough documentation available which gives you good information about all of these settings, right? Okay, now let me just go and create the distribution. Okay, so I've just created the distribution, but it'll take some time to create the distribution. I'll just go click on this distribution. Okay, if you see, the distribution status is in progress. It will take about 5 to 7 minutes or sometimes 10 minutes to create this distribution. So right now what it is doing is it is actually taking the content from my S3 bucket, which is in Mumbai region. It's taking all the content which are static in nature, like such as your HTML, CSS, images, any videos or anything of that sort. And then it is trying to copy it over to all the edge locations that AWS has across the globe. That is what this operation is trying to do. Okay, so depending on the size of the data that you have, depending on the number of assets that you have, all of this data gets replicated and cached in all the edge locations. So that's why it takes about 5 minutes or so, right? So you'll see that this will be in progress. We can actually come back to this. You'll see that this is in progress. Once it is completed, it says it will be completed or it will be enabled. We'll have to just wait for that 5 to 10 minutes to kind of come back. Let's come back to this, right? Once it is available, then what you get is, this is the unique URL that you get for the CloudFront distribution that you have, which will serve the same content that your website is serving, right? I mean, your S3 website is serving this content, right? Triple RPL all within space .s3 website .ap south1.amazon aws.com. Whatever content is being served by this, your CloudFront URL which you have, this is a unique URL. Okay, this will not be assigned to anyone else, right? This is your unique URL for this particular origin or for this particular distribution that you have. Okay, so now this will be a unique URL. You can also access your website using this unique URL. And now what I'm going to do is, once the distribution is created, once this completes, I'm going to take this unique URL and point it to my DNS record. So till now in my DNS record of triplesrpl.allwithinspace.com, I had pointed this URL, right? This S3 is endpoint. Okay, I pointed directly to the S3. So that way, every time a user is trying to access my website, it by default goes to Mumbai. Okay, it always goes to Mumbai. It always goes to the origin server, which is the S3 endpoint, which is in Mumbai. But now what I have done is I have encapsulated that with a CloudFront distribution. Now that CloudFront distribution is taking the S3 content that I have, and it is distributing it across the globe to all the edge locations that AWS has got. And I'm using that CloudFront's distributions endpoint, which is the URL, to point to my DNS record. So that way, if a user is trying to access my website, which is rpl.allwithinspace.com, it'll go to the CloudFront. It will not go to S3 bucket directly. Rather, it will go to the CloudFront, and the CloudFront, it will look for the closest distribution, closest edge location that the CloudFront has got in that particular region next to the user, right? And then it will basically try to serve the content from that particular edge location, which is there, which the CloudFront has got. Okay. So it will not go to my S3 bucket every time. Okay, that is the most important thing that we need to understand out here. Okay, so now let's just wait for some time. Let's just go back, refresh the page to see what has happened. Okay, it's deployed. It's pretty fast because we don't have too much of content, right? I mean, our website is probably a few megabytes in size. So it went ahead and deployed that entire content out there, right? So now let me just try. You can also access your website directly using this random URL. Okay. So if you actually use this with the random URL, okay, I'll just say https:// yeah, see, it takes me to the website, the same website, Wavefire website. Right? I'll just go open the developer tools, and I'll try to refresh it. Yeah, if you see, it is 239 milliseconds to load this CloudFront URL, which is pointing to my S3 bucket in turn, correct? So now let me take the same thing, and then I'll go to my server, which is in the US, right? Now my bucket is in India, which is Mumbai, and CloudFront is a global entity, right? It's not specific to a region. When I create a CloudFront distribution, if I go back, the moment I go to CloudFront, you will see that it changes to global. You won't be able to select a CloudFront in one specific region because it's a global service. It's not a regional service, right? So I'll just go paste it and then press F12, developer tools. I'll just refresh it. Oh, wow. See this. Okay, sorry. Control V. Yeah, I'll just delete this. And then I'll just say hit enter. Okay, so this is basically loading it for the first time. Okay, so now let me just load it for the second time. Yeah, see this. You see this? 189 milliseconds. I'll just refresh it again. 173 milliseconds. I'll refresh it again. 147 milliseconds. Let me go back here. Let me go back to my same from India. And I'm in Hyderabad, right? This laptop is in Hyderabad. This internet connection is in Hyderabad. So it's trying to actually connect to the website through my internet connection, right? I will say refresh 193 milliseconds, 210 milliseconds, 235 milliseconds. Okay, using the CloudFront URL. Whereas if I go and use my S3's endpoint from Hyderabad, I'm getting 351 milliseconds. Okay, I'm getting 351 milliseconds from Hyderabad, 369 milliseconds from Hyderabad to Mumbai. From US to Mumbai. Let's see from US to Mumbai. Okay, this is the S3 endpoint that I have. US to Mumbai, 2.10 seconds. If you see below, the load time took 2.110 seconds. Again, I will load it, 800 milliseconds. Again, I will load it, 900 milliseconds. Okay, forget about the 2 seconds because that's the first time it's loading and it would have cached the content. But now if you see this, 900 milliseconds, which is close to a second, right? 978, 963 milliseconds, which is close to a second. Whereas from locally within Hyderabad, I'm hitting the S3 bucket, 300 seconds, 300 milliseconds, 275 milliseconds, which is like probably 3 times slower, 3 times faster, correct? From Hyderabad, I'm trying to hit Mumbai. It's like 3 times faster, like 87 milliseconds. Whereas from North Virginia, I'm trying to hit Mumbai S3 bucket. It's about close to a second, 982 milliseconds, which is 3 times slower than a user who's trying to access it from Hyderabad to Mumbai. Whereas if I go back to the CloudFront, I'll open the CloudFront URL and I'll try to load it from Hyderabad to Mumbai. It's about 172 milliseconds. In fact, it has even reduced it because there are edge servers in Hyderabad also. Okay, so now it is not even going to Mumbai. It's actually taking the content from my edge server, which is closer to me in Hyderabad itself. So the distance is further reduced. It doesn't have to go all the way to Mumbai from the to the S3 bucket, which is present in Mumbai. It is present in the Hyderabad edge server. It is caching. It is caching the content. It goes to the Hyderabad edge server, which is probably 30-40 kilometers from my home, right? And it's able to fetch that content and load it. That's why you see that it's only taking 172 milliseconds because I'm getting it locally from Hyderabad itself. If you see 190 milliseconds, 140 milliseconds, right? If I go to the US and if I open the CloudFront URL in the US from one of the machines in the US or one of the clients in the US, users in the US, and then I load it, see it's giving the pretty much the same 140 milliseconds, 132 milliseconds, yeah, less than 200 milliseconds, right? So that's the experience that your CloudFront distribution gives you, right? It basically cuts down. It does not give you a notion that the website is hosted in India and the user is present in the US, right? Irrespective of where the user is, or irrespective of where the website is, it gives the same user experience in terms of the response time, right? In this case, if you see, this is also pretty much comparable to what the user is comparable to the response time that the user is actually getting from the Hyderabad region, right? In Hyderabad, I'm sitting in Hyderabad and I'm getting about 147 milliseconds, right? If I go to US, I'm pretty much getting the same 133 milliseconds. It does not give any difference, maybe 10-15 milliseconds here and there, which is fine. That's due to the traffic at that point in time. But pretty much if you see, I'm consistently seeing that my web page is loading in less than 200 milliseconds latency, right? So that's the power of CloudFront, right? So now let me just go and change my DNS record as well, right? I'll just go change the DNS record. I'm just going to quickly stop the screen share, come back. I'll change the DNS record of pointing to SSRPL dot all within space is actually pointing to the S3 bucket, right? Instead of pointing it to the S3 bucket, I'm going to point it to you know the CloudFront distribution instead of pointing it to the. I'm going to show you how to do that. Just hold on. Let me quickly log into the other account. Come back. Okay, cool. So I'm back. Let me reshare my screen. Share the screen. Yeah. So I'm here. So now let me just go to the Route 53. Yeah, I've got a hosted zone there, Route 53, which has all within spaces there, right? So I'm just going there. I'm just looking at my records. Okay, right now, if you see SSRPL.allwithinspace.com is pointing to the S3 bucket, right? If you can see this very closely, it is pointing to my S3 bucket's endpoint because it's not going through CloudFront. It's pointing to my S3 bucket. So now, since it is pointing to my S3 bucket, let me show you the difference. Let me access SSRPL.allwithinspace.com from a computer which is in Hyderabad. Yeah, it's taken 473 milliseconds or 194 milliseconds. Okay, SSRPL.allwithinspace is actually taking about 230 32 milliseconds on an average. Okay, if I access it from a computer which is in Hyderabad. If I access the same URL from a computer which is in US, okay, I'll just refresh this. Yeah, see, it's taking almost like 3-4 times, 600 milliseconds. Yeah, it's almost taking three to 4 times longer, right? Okay, so now let me just go. You see the difference? It's like 232 here. It is almost 600, almost double, right? So let me just go. Let me change the URL of this. I'm just going to edit this record, and say that instead of pointing to the S3 bucket, point this to the CloudFront distribution. So what is the CloudFront distributions endpoint? This is the CloudFront distributions endpoint. Let me copy that, come back here. I'm going to modify this to say that point my rpl.allwithinspace.com to this URL, which is the CNAME. Okay, and TTL is 5 seconds, so that in 5 seconds the records will get propagated. So let's just, I've modified it. So let's just wait for 5 seconds for the records to get propagated across the globe. So then we should be good to go ahead and hit rpl.allwithinspace.com. Okay, I think more than 5 seconds is done. So yeah, I think the DNS propagation would have completed by now. Let me just come back and let me open rpl.allwithinspace.com. Let me just refresh this right now. Yeah, so you get about 200 milliseconds, about 234 milliseconds consistently. Okay. Okay, it's throwing an error. Why is it throwing an error? Okay, let me just troubleshoot that quickly. Okay, okay, that's probably, I'm not using HTTP. Yes, let me change it to HTTPS. Okay, you know why? It's because I have both HTTP and HTTPS, and it's not able to do a domain validation out here. But yeah, pretty much I think the moment we come back and add an SSL certificate to this. So right now, if you see my CloudFront distribution has a default SSL certificate of CloudFront certificate, which has the star.cloudfront.net. So it's not able to do a SSL validation because the request is coming from a different domain, right? I mean, the request is coming from, allwithinspace.com, right? So that's where, it does not see that allwithinspace.com certificate out here. So that's why it's giving that error. That's okay. That's fine. No worries. But, but it should work pretty much. I mean, we just saw it through the CloudFront URL where the request hardly takes about 200, 140, 180, 200 milliseconds. Whereas if you access the same from a US server, also it takes about less than 200 milliseconds. Whereas if you access the S3 bucket directly from US, it takes about 700, 800, 900 milliseconds, which is a visible difference, 2x, 3x difference that you see with CloudFront. Okay, that's the point that I'm trying to drive out here, right? So it's quite simple. And then what you can do is you can also change the behaviors, right? And you can create more behaviors. And you can say that you can add more origins within the same distribution. And you can change the behaviors in such a way that if the path, here in this case, it's a default path, right? Now you have website, um, you have another website, right? So where you want to say that slash blog, right? The website slash blog has to go to a different origin server. You can also say that create behavior, and you can say that path pattern is slash blog and take it to a different origin group. And then you can say that you can do all of those redirections within the CloudFront. It's quite, quite sophisticated. It can supports a lot of path-based routing within the distribution, right? And then you can change those behaviors to match your origin policy, right? How your actual users are coming in. And you can add your own custom error pages, right? And then you can invalidate the content, right? I mean, if I want to say delete all the cache, so now invalidating objects removes them from the CloudFront edge caches. A faster and less expensive mode is to use versioned object or directory names, right? So now if I say create an invalidation, and then I'll say slash star, I'll just go ahead and invalidate. It invalidates all the objects in the cache. Okay, and then it freshly fetches that objects from my S3 bucket, which is in the Mumbai region, and then it distributes it to the entire edge locations in the cache. Okay, so that's what it does. So now, okay, so let's do one thing. I'll just give you some material to study, and then you can also do this in your respective accounts. Okay, because you have a free tier available. Okay, you have a free tier available, and you can actually use that free tier to create a CloudFront distribution, right? And 50 GB of data transfer out is free per month for 12 months. Okay, if you go to the free tier and search by CloudFront, you will see that Amazon CloudFront gives you 50 GB of data transfer out free as part of the free tier, which you can use it, or it's about 2 million HTTP or HTTPS requests, which is a huge benefit that AWS is giving for you to use it and try it out. So what you can do is you can go. I hope all of you have done that exercise yesterday, assignment yesterday, of creating your static website hosting. Now, for that static website hosting, all you need to do is to go to CloudFront, right, and then go to CloudFront distributions, create a distribution, and go to web and paste the URL. Okay, don't select it from here. If you select it from here, it won't work. You have to paste that URL. You have to go to S3 management console, get this URL. Okay, ignore the HTTP part. Ignore the HTTP part from this, whatever it's there, from here to here. Okay, only the highlighted portion. You have to copy that URL, come to the CloudFront distribution, paste it here. Okay, and then origin path, you can just ignore as it is. You can keep all the other settings default as it is. Don't change any setting except for when it comes to the default root object. Yeah, default root object, give it as index.html. Okay, if you just give it as index.html, that is the default root object that you're giving, right? And then just go hit create distribution. Once the distribution gets created, right, then you come back, wait for the distribution state to change as deployed, and then take this URL that you see, and then browse that URL with developer tools on, right? Browse that URL by pressing F12 on your browser, go to the network, and then refresh it and see the time it took. Okay, you can compare this with your S3's endpoint. Okay, you can compare that with your S3's endpoint. Your S3 time will be higher actually. If you directly hit the S3, the time will be higher. Whereas if you hit it through the CloudFront URL, your time will be much lower, because there is, by all possibilities, you are hitting a CloudFront cache location, which is closer to your place, wherever you are currently, right? If you are in Hyderabad, it would take it from Hyderabad, right? And there are multiple cache locations within India itself. So it will figure out which is the closest cache location, and then it will pick up the objects from there. Okay. All right. So I think let's take our logical pause here. I'm just going to give you assignment for 11th November. It's quite interesting, right? When we do such exercises where we see that user experience is changing significantly. So how many of you know what are the other CDNs that are there, other CDN services that are there apart from CloudFront? Other famous CDN services that are there in the industry today, which can be used as a service model. If you want to unmute and talk about it, please do that while I get the assignment document ready. Nobody knows what are the other CloudFront what are the other CDN distributions that are there? Okay, so just read through this to the extent possible. This is the public documentation. I'm also going to search for Jayendra Patel. Yeah, this is also good. Just read through this. Okay, I'm going to give you an assignment for today, which is create a CloudFront distribution for your S3 bucket, which hosts the static website. So how many of you were able to get your static website up and running yesterday? Please raise your hands. Only a few. How about the rest? Only about 20, 25 odd people have raised their hands. The rest of you, are you facing any issues or you've just not tried it?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
That's double sensor. Yesterday we tried some. I'm and our group members are tried in
Okay.
evening 6 o'clock, but
Hmm.
it's not came, sir. The JSON we got the JSON problem. Code JSON code is got unknown errors showing.
No.
To
So
us.
you don't need any JSON for hosting your static website. You can just leave it empty. You don't need any bucket policies for your static website. So, okay, let's do one thing. Let's just go back. I'll close all of this. So if you go to your S3 management console, if I'm hosting a static website, if you go to permissions, you can
Yes,
just
sir.
leave this empty. Leave your bucket policy empty. Don't put anything there. Then it will work. See, that JSON thing is only for restricting your bucket access. Those are the first two assignments that I've given, where you create a bucket policy, where you create another IAM user, and restrict access only to that IAM user, then it works. Then you need bucket policy. But for static websites, where you imagine you are creating your own website, which everybody wants
Yes,
to
sir.
see, right? I mean, you don't want to restrict certain people to view, correct? You want it
Yes,
has
sir.
to be publicly available. Anybody should be able to come and see it, right? So you don't need any authentication for that, right? In such cases, you can just leave it blank. You don't restrict the access to bucket through bucket policy. Okay, so
Yes, sir.
remove this and go to properties and enable static website hosting and download one of those things that I gave from freecss.com, right? Download one of
Yes,
those
sir.
websites, the static website, which is that Wayfire or whatever it is. This is just a sample website. Download it from one of those, unzip it and upload it here, right? And make your bucket public, wherein you have to remove all of this, right? You have to uncheck this. You have to uncheck this, make your bucket public and select all your objects, actions, make it as public. Then go to properties, go to the static website hosting, click this URL, you should be able to access your website.
Okay, sir.
Okay. And
Yes,
in your
sir. Sir.
website, you just give index.html here. Index document is index.html. Error document, you can just leave it blank or just give some error.html. It doesn't matter, but give your index document as index.html. Otherwise, it won't know when you hit the website where it has to redirect, which page it has to serve. Because your index.html is the main page, right? Root page. It has to serve that
Yes, sir.
particular web page. So try that. It will definitely 100% it will work, right? Then
Okay.
create a
Okay, sir.
CloudFront distribution for that, where you take this URL. Okay. Once you create this, once you are able to access the website, then take this URL and create a CloudFront distribution for that URL.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to give you the
Thank you, sir.
steps.
Okay,
Sure,
sir.
no
Thank you,
problem.
sir.
Yeah. Use the static website hosted in S3 from the previous assignment. Copy the URL of the static website created by going to S3 console, properties, and static website hosting. Just follow the steps, you should be able to do it. Static website hosting. Don't copy the http:// copy the highlighted portion only. Okay, so then navigate to CloudFront console. Click on create distribution. Web and get started. Okay, click that and then paste the URL. The origin domain name, paste the URL copied in step 2. Okay, and keep all the other settings undisturbed. Retain all the other settings in the page disturbed. Before that, go to default root object. Default root object, type index.html. Yeah, that's it. Click on create distribution and wait for 5 minutes till the distribution is deployed. Okay, so once the distribution is deployed, come back to the and select this. Okay, select this. Go back to CloudFront and select the cloud distributions URL and paste it in the browser window with F12 developer tools enabled. Pressing F12 developer tools enabled. So yeah, so and you should see the time it takes to load the website. You should see it in the bottom. You should see it in the bottom. Load is 203 milliseconds. Compare the page load duration between directly using the S3's endpoint versus CloudFront's endpoint. Okay, cool. So that's the assignment for today. I'm just going to share the assignment. You can go to your breakout rooms and start doing these assignment. And whoever was not able to do it, please do this. I mean, whatever steps that I gave followed, whatever I gave yesterday, please follow those steps to create the static S3 website, and don't put any bucket policies. Okay, I'm again repeating, don't put any bucket policies. The moment you put bucket policies, it's going to be you're restricting your website access, so only a certain user will be able to access. Okay, so don't put any bucket policies, and ensure that you tell your friends also not to put any bucket policies. I see a few people who have dropped off, but just tell them not to put any bucket policies, and then just use this. I think you should be good. Okay, so these are important topics, S3 and CloudFront. So usually freshers don't learn CloudFront. Okay, I mean, that's what, at least in my experience, but you all have an opportunity to learn about CloudFront and experiment with CloudFront. So please do these exercises, do this assignment, so you can impress in your interviews. When an interviewer asks you, how do you enhance the performance of your website, you can say that use a CDN like CloudFront, where you cache the content in various edge locations, all the static content, so which improves the overall performance of your website. That's a very simple answer that you can give, but a very powerful answer. Okay, all right. So let's again meet tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to start with databases on AWS, RDS. RDS is a very important service. Okay, so we'll start with RDS tomorrow, and then we'll get going from there. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for attending the session today. So we'll see you all tomorrow, and practice S3 and CloudFront to the extent possible. Okay, and we probably have some follow-up sessions. If you're stuck somewhere, we'll do some follow-up sessions sometime. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good day. Sai Ram. Sai Krishna, brother, over to you. Sai Ram.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.